So here we are again, dear viewer, not so boldly going once more into the world of Star Trek Picard. Our mission, to seek out half-decent storylines and original plot ideas.
Y'all must be mistaken.
I'm not feeling very confident about this one. It's fair to say that Star Trek Picard's gotten off to kind of a rocky start over the past few weeks. The first episode was a rushed and confusing hodgepodge of half-baked ideas and contrived action sequences, all based around a world that feels as much like Star Trek as Lily Singh feels like a talented comedian. Episode 2 spent most of its time setting up the stakes and characters for the rest of the season without having a strong narrative of its own, while Episode 3 was such a fucking non-entity that I didn't even bother reviewing it, because honestly I couldn't think of anything interesting to say about it. Which brings us neatly along to Episode 4, Absolute Condor. Sorry, Absolute Candour. If nothing else, it was certainly, interesting enough for me to make a video about it, though probably not for the reasons CBS intended. So let's begin this journey, shall we?
Engage.
Absolute Candour starts us off with yet another tedious flashback to the events of 14 years ago, because I guess we haven't seen this narrative clusterfuck from enough different points of view already. But for anyone who's not familiar with the series, basically the Romulan home planet was about to blow up, so the Federation launched a big rescue effort spearheaded by Picard, but then some assholes destroyed their shipyards, so they called the whole thing off and a lot of Romulans died. Anyway, this time we're on a Romulan refugee planet where survivors are being resettled while the evacuation continues. And for some reason, it's a delightful looking place with solid, well-established buildings and infrastructure, clean water, plentiful food supplies, and a happy and prosperous population. And I couldn't help but think, what the fuck is going on here? This looks more like a tourism commercial than a refugee camp. Why does everyone look so comfortable and relaxed? Jesus, Picard even shows up looking like the man from Del Monte.
Knows that moment.
The man from Del Monte says yes.
And yeah, I know Dave Cullen got there first with that joke, but shut up, I came up with it independently, so I'm keeping it in there. Anyway, the whole thing seems totally at odds with the events as I understand them. The evacuation of the Romulan homeworld was supposed to be a desperate race against time to save as many people as possible before their sun exploded. These refugees should be frightened, confused, and desperate for news about friends and family back home. Picard should be exhausted and worn out, devoting every waking moment to organising the rescue efforts. But the script is like, nah, it'll be fine. Why depict a realistic refugee situation when you can contrast this cheerful place with the godforsaken dump it turns into in the present day for some really clunky and manipulative storytelling later in the episode. So Picard chats with the leader of the fuck it. A bunch of warrior nuns who run the place. Yep, that's the thing now. The Romulans have a society of warrior nuns because the plot of this episode needed to happen. He also plays at sword fighting with a young orphan boy who's living with them and becomes a kind of surrogate father to him. Never mind though, I'm sure that won't be relevant later in the episode. But then, oh no, Picard gets a phone call saying that Mars has been blown up by the androids. Sorry, synthetics.
I prefer the term artificial person myself.
I'll get it right one day, don't you worry. And the rescue mission has been called off, so Picard gets sad and leaves to sort everything out. Then he disappears for 14 years. Did his watch stop? Or did he realise he was never going to get any action from the warrior nuns and bailed out to bag himself a sweet Irish Romulan housekeeper instead?
Cheeky fuckers.
Perhaps we shall never know the full truth. Flash forward to the present day, and Picard and the gang are in a race against time to rescue diverse female character before those crazy Romulans find and kill her. They're on a ship belonging to roguish male captain who doesn't actually have a crew, but rather a bunch of holograms that he just kind of activates whenever they're needed. And for some reason, they all look exactly like him, which kind of made me wonder, if you're on your own and you've got the ability to create a customized hologram in any form, why not choose something a little more aesthetically pleasing? Also, it looks kind of confusing visually when you've got multiple versions of the same character on screen at the same time and you're not sure which is the real one. Anyway, there's also Raffi, the strong, diverse female character who lost her commission in Starfleet when Picard resigned because she was his assistant or something.
Isn't that logical?
Even though she totally didn't want to resign, and there's no reason to suggest her conduct or performance warranted such an action, whatever. The plot needed it to happen, I guess, so here she is. Raffi's still kinda pissed off at Picard, and she's vowed never to work with him again after what happened last time, which kind of makes me suspect she doesn't really understand the meaning of words. She and Picard are on this ship together, cooperating with each other, exchanging information, and completing tasks in order to progress towards a mutually beneficial end goal. Like, isn't that the very definition of working together? Oh, and brilliant female scientist is also there because, well, I guess the script will think of something later. But right now, she's just an annoying arsehole that babbles on about space being really big. What's a brilliant scientist you are. Also, it took me a while to realise this, but her eyes are disturbingly close together, and now that I've noticed it, I can't not see it. And because of this video, neither can you. Anyway, she keeps pestering roguish male captain while he's trying to read a book in peace. Jesus, she's like a fucking child whining for attention. Regardless, pay particular attention to this scene, dear viewer, because it's a perfect example of the amazing writing in this show. So roguish male captain is getting kind of impatient because she keeps interrupting him, and when she mentions that she used to do the same exact thing to another guy in her life, roguish male captain asks what he did about it. And she's like, nothing, because he was my father. Now, you might think this would be a good opportunity for our man here to fire back with a little quip or a passive-aggressive remark of some kind. Something along the lines of, well, I'm not your dad, so I don't have to put up with you. You know, something that would establish him as the kind of guy who's initially cold and dismissive towards strangers and who doesn't take shit from anyone, especially on the bridge of his own starship. I mean, the guy uses emergency holograms of himself instead of having an actual crew, which suggests to me that he's not very good around other people. Wouldn't a tense interaction like this be a good way to reinforce that idea? But nah, he just sits there in silence and waits for the next dumb question to come rolling in from not so brilliant female scientist. Now, I know this is just a tiny little example, but this failure to show initiative, take command of a conversation, or even just have a good bit of verbal sparring is something I keep noticing amongst the male characters in Picard. They're passive and submissive instead of being active and independent. They take insults and criticism, but they never give anything back, like they're afraid to open their mouths or something. Meanwhile, the women are all aggressive, assertive, and domineering, and it just seems a little unbalanced. Anyway, on with whatever passes for a plot. So Raffi gets angry when she finds out that Picard is taking them on a detour to the planet from his flashback. And to be honest, I fully agree with her on this one. Why are you doing this, JL? You're supposed to be in a race against time to save diverse female character, not dropping in to catch up with old friends. I love how he's even taken the time to set up a holographic reproduction of Chateau de Picard, so he can kick back and relax in his spare time. What the fuck? You know what Picard had back on the Enterprise when he wasn't needed on the bridge? A captain's ready room, and that was perfectly adequate for him. He didn't need any of this self-indulgent shit. Like he's a little child that might get homesick or something.
You are 6 years old!
Also, I feel like this script doesn't really understand the concept of pace and urgency. You can't set up a desperate race against time to drive the events of your entire show, and then just put it on hold whenever it becomes inconvenient. It's hard to feel tension when nothing that happens has any real consequences. So what's the vital mission that's taken our man JL back to the flashback planets? Well, apparently he's decided that he needs a warrior to protect them, and what better place to go than the planet of warrior nuns? Wow, it's a shame you don't already have two highly trained, highly experienced, and reliable operators cleaning your space toilet back at the chateau, eh? You know, the ones that totally wiped the floor with a fully armed assault team. And the thing that makes this situation even dumber, if that was possible, is that the people he wants to recruit are basically space ninjas who specialize in hand-to-hand combat. Great, that's just what you need in a universe where advanced particle beam weapons are easily obtainable and can be used by virtually anyone. And I couldn't help but think, what is the fucking point in leaving behind two highly effective and loyal allies, diverting from your extremely urgent mission and wasting precious time, all to enlist the help of someone who's less useful than the people you already have? You know, it really pisses me off when sci-fi shows try to present swords as still being viable weapons, despite the fact they went out of fashion more than a century ago, because they were basically useless in the face of automatic infantry weapons.
Don't forget your stick, Lieutenant.
Right there, sir. Wouldn't want to face a machine gun without this.
But man, they sure do look cool on screen, and that's what we're all about now with New Trek. Surface level flashiness, with absolutely no brains behind it. Anyway, I guess it's time for more exposition. So it looks like law and order in this region has broken down over the past 14 years, because the Federation pulled out, and apparently the Romulans aren't capable of governing themselves. Kinda makes you wonder where the Romulan Star Empire came from, eh? And to make matters worse, some arsehole got his hands on an old Romulan warbird that he's using to terrorise nearby planets. This place was supposed to be protected by the Fenris Rangers, whatever the fuck they are, but there's apparently not enough of them to maintain the peace, so that's looking bad. Why am I telling you all this shite, you might ask? Because I want you to get some sense of just how much exposition and world building this show tries to cram into like the first 10 minutes of the episode. There's so many different factions and events to get your head around that they all kind of blend together into an undefined mush. And the implementation is so clunky and awkward. This is the kind of conversation that would never actually happen between real people, because everyone involved should have known all of this stuff long before they even got to this point. Anyway, they get to the flashback planet, and there's a big defensive shield around it, meaning it's impossible to land or beam down. But then Picard beams down anyway, so fuck knows what the point of that was. And once he arrives, he finds the place is now a dump filled with criminals and lowlifes. Look, there's even a racist keep out sign written in English on a planet composed entirely of Romulans.
Isn't that logical?
It's not often I find myself at a loss for words, but you've genuinely managed to do that with me, Picard. Anyway, everyone's pissed at him because I guess he didn't do enough to help them 14 years ago. I'd like to point out that Picard is literally the only reason that any of them are alive at all, but apparently nobody else thinks to mention that, including Picard, so whatever I guess. If he won't defend himself, I'm certainly not gonna do it for him. So he tracks down the leader of the Space Ninjas, and she's mad that he basically abandoned them, and the only reason he's here now is because he wants something from them. And when you put it like that, it is kind of a dick move. I love how Patrick Stewart sits through this entire scene with a kind of confused, embarrassed look on his face, like he's secretly thinking, she's absolutely right. This script makes no fucking sense at all. Why did I even sign up for this show? Here is my biggest problem with this new Picard. Swap his French chateau for Craggy Island and his delightfully full-bodied red wine for green alien titty milk, and he's basically Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, a broken old man who got knocked down once and never tried to rise up again. A character with absolutely no life, no goals, ambitions, ideas, or motivation except when we're directly viewing him. He might as well have been in a coma for the past 14 years, and as hard as I try, I just can't reconcile this weak, cowardly old man with the Jean-Luc Picard I used to know.
I can't live out my days as that person. That man is bereft of passion and imagination.
Picard's entire life and career has been defined by his deep moral convictions and his willingness to pursue them even at great personal cost. In fact, a lot of the storylines in The Next Generation focused on the conflict between his own personal morality and his duty as a Starfleet officer. He's shown countless times that he's willing to push back against authority, disobey orders, and even risk his own ship and crew to do the right thing. This isn't a guy who would just give up on life because he bluffed about resigning and Starfleet called it. He would find another way to attack the problem. He'd become a diplomat, or an activist, or he'd start a Picard Foundation or something. The point is, the one thing he wouldn't do is sit on his arse back at his chateau for 14 years while the galaxy fell apart around him. It's simply not who he is. But this script is like, nah, it'll be fine. This is the new Picard, you see. The kind of guy who can only react to things that happen to him, but not actually do anything on his own initiative. What's a fucking genius writer you are, Alex Kurtzman. Thank you for this contribution to the Star Trek universe.
Sheer fucking hubris.
Anyway, this is where we get to the real point of the episode, if you can call it that. Remember the little kid from the flashback at the start? Well, now he's grown up into Elrond of Rivendell. And of course, because this is the new edgy Trek that tries to pander to a young audience that was never going to care about it anyway, he's an angsty teenager that's angry at his surrogate father for leaving him. Those deadbeat dads, eh?
I am not a merry man.
So Picard tells Elrond that he's sorry, because that seems to be his whole reason for being these days. He's just terribly sorry all the time, for all the mistakes he's made, and all the people he's failed and let down. Who is this bald imposter pretending to be my beloved Jean-Luc? But Elrond tells him to piss off, so Picard wanders into a nearby tavern and provokes the Romulan gangster into fighting him. And this forces Elrond to kill the guy by slicing his fucking head off, like this is a scene from Highlander or something. And for some reason Picard gets all mad at him, like he's totally shocked by what happens. What the fuck? You engineered that entire situation to force Elrond to save you, ya dick. What did you expect him to do? Engage the guy in polite conversation? I could point out that if Elrond had been armed with, say, a phaser, he could have just stunned the guy and saved Picard's life without killing anyone. But nah, swords are totally better. So they beam up to the ship, because the script says that can happen now, and Picard introduces Elrond to everyone, and Raffi's like, "Greet a boy with a stick."
I am not a merry man.
I'd like to bring you back to my earlier point about dialogue between men and women in this show. This situation would be an ideal time for Elrond to fire back with some clever put down of his own, or even move in close to her with his hand on his sword and mutter some thinly veiled threat, warning her not to insult or underestimate him. You know, the sort of thing that would help to establish him as a cold, ruthless, badass killing machine like he's supposed to be. But nah, he just stands there like a fucking plank of wood and takes it, just like every other man in this show. Just let them insult you and walk all over you guys. That's guaranteed to earn their respect. Speaking of having no respect for a character, weak male scientist is having a nap on the Borg cube when his sister sneaks into his bedroom and threatens him because he's not getting any results and he's basically a waste of skin. And it was weird because their previous interactions suggested they were working together on equal footing, but now I guess he's just a cowardly whipping boy that she can abuse whenever she feels like it. Are you spotting a theme with the male characters in this show? Anyway, whatever, it's time for a cheesy space battle to round out this delectable banquet of entertainment. Remember that stolen bird of prey I mentioned earlier? Well, the script decides it's time for it to conveniently show up, and it immediately attacks Picard's ship without knowing anything about it, why it's here, or what its combat capabilities are. I guess the captain is just a dick like everyone else. The weird thing about this battle is that it never really seems like they're in much danger. Roguish male captain even mentions that their ship is faster and more maneuverable than their opponent, so you'd think it would make sense to fly rings around them and just wear them down with prolonged fire. But then another ship comes in to save them, even though they shouldn't need saving, and it's never made clear what their situation is, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the other ship is damaged, and they beam the pilot over before his ship crashes, except it's not a man at all. This is 7 of 9 from Star Trek Voyager. You know that show which never actually crossed over with The Next Generation, so that 7 of 9 meeting Picard doesn't actually mean anything in this context? Yeah, that one. Anyway, she passes out and the episode ends and that's it. What a strange experience this was. You know, if I had to pick a word to describe absolute candour...
My word is poontang.
No, my word would be contrived. Nothing that's happening feels logically consistent or even believable. It's a story that plays out because it has to, because it needs to accomplish certain things, and it can't think of a smart way to do it, so it just forces in events, characters, and decisions that feel totally out of place. Picard is now a whiny, defeated, cowardly old man who keeps apologising for existing and doesn't have an ounce of authority or charisma left in him. There's still no explanation for why the Romulans couldn't evacuate their own planet instead of expecting the Federation to do it for them. Everyone fucking hates Picard even though he was instrumental in saving their lives. Absolute Candour feels 15 minutes of actual storyline stretched out into an entire episode. It doesn't really tell us anything new about past events or Picard's involvement involvement. Diverse female character is still messing around on the Borg cube, and about the only noteworthy thing she does is go ice skating in an air vent with weak male scientist. Really, our gang are in the exact same position by the end as they were at the beginning, except they now have a couple of extra characters to add to an already bloated cast. I mean, I doubt 7 of 9 is going to stick around for long, but Elrond seems like he'll be integrated into things permanently. Wow, can't wait for all the strong female characters to start bossing him around too. The overarching storyline is left in a holding pattern while this episode plays out, and for me it suggests there might be a larger problem with Picard. There isn't actually that much of a story to work with. It's like there's too many episodes and not enough plot to fill them with. Also, the writers don't seem to know how to work within the constraints of a ticking clock, which was supposed to be the whole point of this season. Ultimately, Picard feels like a show that's going nowhere fast and not making a particularly good job of it. It's meandering and badly paced, filled with too many characters, too much exposition, and too many lame attempts to mimic the action and adventure of Star Wars. A show that desperately wants to say something profound, but lacks the intelligence, the experience, and the finesse needed to actually express it. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if it's even worth carrying on with it. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Go away now.